I try to communicate with them every day, with all of them. Unfortunately, my grandmother died right before the war, but yeah, I always contact them by FaceTime or by chatting with them, asking like how are they doing, if they need like any help or yeah, something like that. Unfortunately, this is it what I can do from here. Yeah.
Of course, thousands of miles away, and you must feel so helpless not be able to do more to aid them. And I mean, as we look at the broader scope of this war and you see some of the tragedies and atrocities that are being committed in places like Bucha in European, what goes through your mind?
Yeah. Um, there was a photo of my best friend, and she's from Bucha, and she spent 14 days in her basement without heat, food, water. So they weren't able just to sleep in their actual house because Russian troops were shooting like continuously over like 14 days, and they still alive. They went to Slovenia, but she told me that it was like 50% if they will be alive because uh, there are so many dead like bodies on the floor, destroyed houses, cars, Russian tanks everywhere. So it was so dangerous to move to the future, and I'm so happy that she made it.
Talking to your friends and family members that were able to move to safe locations or are still threatened right now, what is the perception of just how widespread the violence is? And is there any sense that any place in Ukraine right now is safe?
I don't think that there is a place in Ukraine where you can be like 100% safe because I knew that everyone was moving to Lviv in order to be safer. But today I was shocked because 7 people died and there were 5 rockets in that city. So there is no place in Ukraine where you can be safe for now. So it's so dangerous.
It's unimaginable. And you're in California right now, having to watch this unfold thousands of miles away. Certainly, we are thinking of you and your family right now. Thank you, Maria, for your time.
Thank you.
Well, as last-minute tax filers right now race to meet the deadline, President Biden is taking the opportunity to try to promote his plan for sweeping tax changes. The president wants to implement his so-called billionaire minimum tax plan, which would dramatically increase how much some of the wealthiest Americans pay the federal government. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joining us now from Washington with more details. Josh, tell us more about how the Biden administration's plan is going to work, and most importantly, where does it stand with Congress?
Well, the key element of this plan that the administration is calling attention to today, Sam, is this billionaire's tax, which is a bit of a misleading term because it would actually apply to households that are worth $100 million or more. So it's a 100 millionaire tax that would, according to the Biden administration, provide more fairness, particularly to wealthy earners and large corporations that are paying less of their in taxes proportionally than lower income individuals. The Biden administration saying it is sticking with a commitment that President Biden made when he was a candidate not to raise taxes on households more than $400,000. But to your question about where things stand, this is the very similar proposal to one Biden has had ever since he took office that has gotten very little traction in Congress. In fact, they've even been unable to reverse those 2017 tax cuts that a lot of Democrats are very unhappy about, felt favored the rich, and yet those are still standing despite Democrats controlling the Congress. So it speaks to the very difficult climate right now in Congress to try to get anything passed to really change the tax code.
Right. We are seeing certainly the pendulum attempt to swing from one side to the other on tax cuts, depending upon who's actually in power. The White House is criticizing Republicans over those tax cuts. They're also saying that the party's new plan would increase taxes for middle-class Americans. So how is the GOP responding to those accusations?
Well, unsurprisingly, they disagree with the White House's characterization of this, and they say that today's focus from the White House on taxes really only calls more attention to what Republicans say are the disastrous effects of Biden's economic policies on everyday Americans. In fact, the Republican National Committee out with a statement today saying that the inflation just since Biden took office works out to about $550 per month per person more than people are paying than when President Biden took office. They say today, tax day is almost like the worst holiday. But there's also something very interesting the White House is trying to do with the Republican approach to this, Sam, which is to call particular attention to what they see as an unforced error by Senator Rick Scott, a Republican who put out a plan that, according to some economists, would dramatically cut Social Security, Medicaid, those basic necessities that so many Americans, especially older ones, rely on. Democrats now have done polling on this. They are putting out ads in Senate campaigns, and the White House today holding it up as an example of what they say Republicans stand for, which they say is fewer taxes for the wealthy and more difficult economic policies for the working class.
And certainly Senator Scott trying to walk some of those comments back since about taxing some of the poorest Americans. Josh Letterman, thank you so much for your reporting. Sticking right now with Capitol Hill, President Biden's Build Back Better plan. Remember that? Maybe building itself back toward reality. Democrats right now are aiming to pass pieces of that legislation months after it was shot down by West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor has been doing some outstanding original reporting on this topic. Sahil, it's been a while since we've had a conversation on Build Back Better. Remind us, what's in this bill? Why did it stall?
Hey, Sam. Well, this bill is a smorgasbord of President Biden's campaign promises, everything from paid leave to child care to health care to climate change funding, tax increases on the wealthy. It was so central to his campaign platform that they literally named the bill after his 2020 campaign slogan. So that's what the goal was. Now, of course, this came to a screeching halt last December when a critical vote, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, said no, he could not support the bill that had passed the House of Representatives. And since then, there has been a blame game. There's been finger pointing within the Democratic Party as they look to revive this effort, try to salvage what they can out of that bill by curtailing it to a version that Senator Joe Manchin can support. And there is disagreement still within the Democratic Party about what went wrong. There are progressives, who blame moderates for working against President Biden. There are moderates who blame progressives for raising expectations too high that these slim majorities in Congress could not handle. And some blame the White House as well as Democratic leadership for splitting off that infrastructure package, which they say was the critical leverage over Senator Joe Manchin. And yet others blame Senator Chuck Schumer for withholding a document that Joe Manchin said sent him, saying that he could only support up to $1.5 trillion. So there's that old saying, it's hard to fix something if you don't know what's broken. And that's kind of where the Democratic Party is right now, including the White House.
All right, as lawmakers on the Democratic side try to figure out their priorities from this bill, piece it together, or I should say apart into smaller sections, what are the political implications, especially with the midterms looming here in a number of months?
Right. Well, firstly, if this is going to get done in any form or fashion, it has to get done this year because the odds are very high that Republicans will control at least one chamber of Congress early in 2023. Now, I've spoken to Senator Joe Manchin numerous times over the last few months, and he's fleshed out a version that he can support in a reasonable amount of detail here. He likes the tax increases on upper earners and corporations. He's good with the roughly $500 billion in climate change and clean energy funding. That's likely to have some minor tweaks, but he's generally good with that. He likes the prescription drug savings, which is a huge thing for the White House. President Biden and Democrats over the last several cycles have campaigned on it. So there is a version of this that can pass and that would still amount to a major accomplishment. But getting from A to Z here is going to be very complicated. It's going to require the White House and Democratic leadership saying no to a lot of Democrats. 95% of the party supports a package that's much bigger, but they're not going to get anything if they aren't able to say no and coalesce the entire party, essentially more than 99% of lawmakers in Congress who are Democrats behind a version that can pass. The implications are huge because many Democrats see this as their only chance to pass something major, something transformative between now and the midterm elections that they can campaign on and say, this is what we did to make your lives better. This is what we did to lower your costs. And by the way, that billionaires tax you just mentioned, Sam, the only chance that has any path of passing Congress is through this, the filibuster-proof reconciliation package that Republicans can't block.
Yeah, hard to see any members of the Republican Party being willing to endorse that. Sahil, thank you so much for a complicated breakdown to make that clear for us. Coming up next, a Hollywood drama playing out in a Virginia courtroom. Up next, the star-studded witness list as Johnny Depp and Amber Heard face off in court.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open every night. It's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Today. Future's looking bright.
Time to give yourself an entire body reset.
Let's go.
The new approach to saving our planet. Simple life swaps, great for the environment.
We're celebrating greatness, redefining what it means to be a family.
They say it takes a village, and you guys actually have created your own village.
We are ready, ready, ready. We got a little spring in our step.
Spring!
This is quite the spring break crowd.
Live from Ukraine, from Mayfield, Kentucky, from Waukesha, Wisconsin. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
I also want to get home.
You'll get home. You'll get home. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months. Exactly. Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Can this still end diplomatically with Vladimir Putin in charge of Russia? Our promise to take in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. Is that enough? The circus-like stuff that the hearings turned into. This system seems broken. What do? If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open every night. It's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Welcome back. A former Hollywood couple back in court today. Johnny Depp is suing ex-wife Amber Heard for defamation for a 2018 Washington Post op-ed. Heard has since filed a countersuit accusing Depp's lawyers of defaming her. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joining us now. This, of course, Steve, pertains to a very serious subject matter of abuse. What have we heard so far in court today?
So it has been all about Johnny Depp's doctor. He's being cross-examined, actually, as we speak, testifying for Johnny Depp, saying essentially that he saw no evidence of abuse. So let me just take you back through the abridged history in this, Sam, because I think it's important to establish where we are, right? So Heard and Depp met on set. They get together. They get married. They fall in love. It's a very tumultuous relationship. On both sides, they get a divorce. There's a settlement in 2016, and along with it, allegations of abuse from Amber Heard, that she was abused physically, mentally, sexually by Johnny Depp. Depp denies all these allegations. Then she goes on to write that op-ed about surviving domestic abuse in 2018. So that's what this whole case is centered on. If you take nothing from this report, it's that this is about defamation, as you established, and libel. So it's important to say that all Heard really has to do is deny the fact that she ever was attempting to defame Johnny Depp. And through that, yes, she is attempting, through her lawyers, to paint Depp as a monster, somebody that abused drugs, abused alcohol, and then through that abused her. She already said through her lawyers that he punched her, he kicked her, he pulled out chunks of her hair, and yes, he did sexually abuse her as well. Johnny Depp, on the other hand, has to prove actual malice, that she was, through that op-ed, trying to destroy Johnny Depp. And to do that, he has to paint her as a monster as well, that not only was she manipulative, that she physically abused Johnny Depp. I think every expert will tell you that that is much harder to do than what Heard has to do. Sam.
Well, a lot of details, haunting details involved in that, Steve. And, you know, this is also playing out in Hollywood. There's reportedly a star-studded witness list for the trial. Do you know who's expected to testify and what they might actually share?
Yeah, so we've heard James Franco could be testifying, a friend of Amber Heard, for Amber Heard through their communication during the whole relationship. Elon Musk, if you can believe it, for Amber Heard as well. They were romantically linked. There was some report that he was offering to have 24-hour security for Heard as well. And the actor Paul Bettany, friends with Johnny Depp, to testify on his behalf. Not to mention that Heard and Depp scheduled to testify themselves. Sam?
And Steve, have we heard at all from Amber Heard since this trial began?
So I can just really quickly give you the literal answer and the more figurative answer. The literal answer is no, we haven't heard from Amber Heard whatsoever. In fact, she left an Instagram post thanking her followers, saying this is very difficult for her, but that she will not be saying anything as the trial goes on. But more, you know, sort of metaphorically, we've heard maybe more from Heard through her legal team in this case than we ever have before. Just in her defense of the details of what she says happened during their marriage, which, as you mentioned, have been haunting, have been graphic, and it's only, you know, just a few weeks into something that could last 5 more weeks. And not to mention, again, that she's scheduled to testify herself, so we will theoretically directly hear from her as well.
All right,
Sam.
Steve Patterson putting on his legal cap for us today, and doing it with aplomb. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thanks, Sam.
Comedian Bill Cosby, once again in court facing sexual assault charges. This time, Cosby is accused of assaulting Judy Huff in 1974 when she was only 15 years old, after Cosby brought the teen to a party at the Playboy Mansion. Cosby's attorneys have denied those allegations. Cosby, of course, won his previous legal battle when the Supreme Court ruled to not review the decision that freed him from prison last year. To break all this down, NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos joining us now. So these allegations, Danny, stem from a 1974 encounter, clearly over the statute of limitations. So what kind of penalties can this case actually lead to?
The only penalties in a civil case like this are going to be money. That is what the plaintiff is looking for. There is no risk in this particular case of criminal prosecution. However, there is a risk that evidence could come out that might possibly interest the prosecutor. But the reality is, 40-plus years later, almost 50 years later, it's likely that any criminal statute of limitations has likely run, as has likely the statute in this case, which was a heated issue.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that. So what is the statute of limitation for civil litigation in this case? Do you have any sense?
It has long since expired in California. The plaintiff's theory is that because this, I believe, is the only accuser of Cosby's that was a child when allegedly accused, and therefore the plaintiff's team is arguing that for that reason, the statute of limitations is, the word is told, but you could describe it as hitting the pause button until the child is able to recognize or understand or realize that they were assaulted. And of course, Cosby has argued that she realized this long ago, and therefore the statute has long since expired.
Another curious part of this, Danny, is the judge in the case has agreed to allow Cosby to invoke the Fifth Amendment. Why would the judge do that?
In theory, once he was exonerated by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and I really should just say his case was thrown out, then arguably he had no longer any Fifth Amendment protection. In other words, while he was convicted, he could be forced to testify. Now that he's released, there's a real issue as to whether or not he will run into potential criminal liability. And however remote that is, even if there is a possibility, the safer thing for the judge to do, and I rather agree with this position, is that if there's any chance he could incriminate himself when he's being asked about incriminating things, therefore the judge should err on the side of caution and allow him to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, even if the likelihood or possibility of incrimination is pretty small.
Danny Cevallos, thank you so much. Always an enlightening conversation. No doubt a lot of public attention on that case. Turning to a very different subject matter right now. The holiday, we're coming off of Easter. What's a little different for the royals this year? After the break, how things went for the rest of the royal family with the Queen spending time outside of the public eye.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
All this month,
How urgent is our position as far as our climate's concerned?
exploring innovative new steps to save our wildlife
We're going to go find some bison.
and protect our planet. Only on Today.
Live from Ukraine, from Mayfield, Kentucky, from Waukesha, Wisconsin. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
I also want to get home.
You'll get home. You'll get home. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months. Exactly. Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now. Our world is facing some complex issues. Chuck Todd breaks them down. Every Thursday, a deep dive into a new subject.
Instead of covering a lot of topics in one show, we're going to focus on one and take a deeper look at how it impacts America.
Exploring and explaining the critical stories that affect our future. Meet the Press Reports. Thursdays at 10:30 p.m. Streaming on NBC News Now and on demand next day on Peacock.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open every night. It's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Well, the light rain dampened the White House grounds, but not spirits, as a beloved Easter tradition returned for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic today. More than 30,000 kids and parents were at the White House for the Easter egg roll, doing some rolling of themselves. The event dates back to 1878. This year's theme, Eggucation, a nod to First Lady and longtime educator Dr. Jill Biden. No way I pronounced that correctly, but that's okay. Turning now to the royal family, and spotted celebrating Easter Sunday without Queen Elizabeth as she scales back her appearances. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, Harry and Meghan cheering on wounded veterans competing at the Invictus Games. Here's NBC's Keir Simmons with more.
Hey there, good day to you. The Queen's Christian faith is very, very famously important to her. So for her to miss the Easter Sunday service, well, that is a big deal. It signals big changes within the royal family. And another branch of the family who've seen changes over the years, Harry and Meghan, well, they were at an event which is perhaps the most precious to them of all. That's Prince Harry's Invictus Games for injured servicemen and women. Prince William and Kate attending Easter services in their springtime best at St. George's Chapel. Their two eldest children, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, joining them for their first Easter church outing and matching their parents, sporting shades of blue. Absent, though, was Queen Elizabeth, the monarch and head of the Church of England, who turns 96 this week and has been mostly out of the public eye following a positive COVID diagnosis in February. Although she has